Tradition, our reading comes from the message today, but I guess it's my tradition, but then again, I'm the only one that does Taize, so there it is. Today's message comes from Luke's Gospel. One day, he and his disciples got in a boat. "Let's cross the lake," he said, and off they went. It was smooth sailing, and he fell asleep. A terrific storm came up suddenly on the lake. Water poured in, and they were about to capsize. They woke Jesus. "Master, Master, we're going to drown." Getting to his feet, he told the wind to silence and the waves quiet down. They did. The lake became smooth as glass. Then they said to his disciples, "Why can't you trust me?" This ends today's reading. Switch books. Here we go. So in today's gospel, Jesus physically calms a storm and then asks the question, "Why don't you trust me?" In the psalm, which we heard in the song today, God's voice is in the thunder and flattens the cedars. Now, the image of a man telling the seas to calm down and the storms to cease is a little hard to picture as reality. But if anyone has seen pictures of or remembers the blast at Mount St. Helens, we know what flattened cedars look like. There is a dichotomy in our souls when it comes to storms, I think. How many of us are in awe when they see the videos of thunder and lightning, or maybe a tornado in a field somewhere in a distance? How many glue themselves to the TV to see the flooding and the storm surge and the spectacle of a reporter in the middle of a hurricane? Actually, there's something quite justified about a reporter being in the middle of a hurricane. We have a sense of safety and awe and beauty when we see a storm at a distance. We're not affected by it. You know, I remember when I first entered the diocesan seminary in Detroit, they had this tower in the front of the building that's about 7 stories high, and me being the explorer that I am, I found my way up to the tower and the hatch that opened to the flat roof. And when there was a storm coming in Michigan, you could sit on this tower, look off in the distance and see the lightning flashing against the clouds miles away. And it was safe. It was awesome. It was beautiful. It was safe to watch a storm from a distance, but when it lands at home and the walls shake and the wind howls and the windows rattle, well, often our perceptions change. It becomes angry and threatening, and we cannot wait for it to be over, especially if you ever had to sit in the basement listening to the AM transistor radio waiting for an all clear. Some of the pleasures of growing up in Michigan or practically anywhere in the Midwest. Our ancient world often blamed the storms on angry gods, and yet those same gods were also blamed for the bountiful crops and fertility. They usually had dual affiliations. Well, namely because after the storm, there's water, and water brings life. Now, the Hebrews, Jesus' tradition, had a little bit different. They believed that God, without any detriment to God's majesty, makes God's presence known, even through the force of nature. The Israelites envision God as one who reveals God's self through the sudden and the unexpected, the terrifying and the awesome forces of nature, namely the thunderstorm and lightning. Often storms are attributed to God's wrathful response in today's world, with an image of a vengeful God. Lord knows our LGBTQ community has been blamed for just about every act of nature there is. I want that on a t-shirt. I have the power. Yeah, it comes again and again, except for when the instance of the storm hits the home of one of those preachers. In an article from religionnews.com exactly a month ago today, came the news that the Baton Rouge flooding destroyed Tony Perkins' home and forced the Family Research Council president and his family to escape by canoe to their RV on higher ground. Perkins revealed this in a special segment of his radio show a couple of days later, describing the disaster as a flood near biblical proportions. And those are those who noted some irony in here, since When Hurricane Joaquin threatened Washington last year, Perkins declared the storm to be God's punishment for the Supreme Court same-sex marriage decision. And that, of course, recalled the interpretations of Hurricane Katrina by Pat Robertson or John Hagee and Yehuda Levin, as well as Robertson and Jerry Falwell's explanation of 9/11 and so on. These are what known, quote, in the trade as exercises of theodicy, justifying bad things as demonstration of God's goodness and omnipotence and righteous judgment. But Perkins, who in his interview stayed away from any of that speculation this time, the flood, he said, is a great opportunity for the church to minister. The experience has taught him, quote, what is important, and sometimes we get too occupied with the other things of life. I hate to say it, but in this instance, Tony Perkins was right. He got something right. God bless him for that one time. In the midst of the storm, we need to trust God. Jesus asked, why don't you trust me? I mean, the disciples had Jesus right there with them, physically with them, and yet in the midst of the storm, they panicked. In this day and age, as we are seeing more extreme weather, more storms, more devastation, instead of playing the blame game or getting all justified and righteous, we need to see this for what it is. God's voice is in the thunder. And this is our call, not only to minister to others, but to the planet herself. The voice of God could not be any louder, could it? Summer is hotter, fire season is all year long, hurricanes are stronger, and the floods are moving further and further inland. Yet many do not trust that this is the voice of God calling all humanity into action. Now, I'm not just speaking of the continued call to service and monies needed for refugees and victims of the natural disasters, but the call to reverse what we can and try to limit the extent of human damage to the atmosphere and the planet. We have come a long way, as I pointed out last week in my sermon. We have achieved bringing certain species back from the brink of extinction. And I'm also proud to say, and I'm going to brag a little bit, give President Obama some applause as he's stepping down. Our president has done more than any other president has ever done in preserving lands and trying to reverse our footprints. He's gone beyond the call of duty when he signed the Omnibus Public Land Management Act of 2009. President Obama marked the most extensive expansion of land and water conservation. I always wanted to say that the wrong way. Conservation in more than a generation, designating more than 2 million acres of federal wilderness, thousands of miles of trails, and protecting more than 1,000 miles of rivers. In addition, the President has used his authority under the Antiquities Act 13 times to permanently preserve some of America's most treasured landscapes and waters, and most recently designating the San Gabriel Mountains a national monument in Los Angeles County, which is one of the most disadvantaged counties in the country when it comes to access to parks and open spaces for the minorities and children. I know this is a lot about President Obama, but forgive me, he has done a lot. For example, he also created the largest marine sanctuary in the world with a single signature. One swipe of a pen, he created a reserve that ended up resulting in 370,000 square nautical miles. That's 490,000 square miles as we know it. Protecting the tropical islands and the atolls in the southern central Pacific Ocean. Expanding the monument will more fully protect the deep coral reefs, the seamounts, and the marine ecosystems unique to this part of the world, which are also among the most vulnerable due to climate change. Yes, this is just one man with a lot of power. And you can say, well, I can't do anything like that. But each one of us can seek out ways to make a difference. Yesterday was Beach Cleanup Day. Now, I've heard this on the news a couple of times every year. I didn't realize until I looked it up that this is not just our beaches. This year they expected over 500,000 volunteers in 91 countries to get together. And, well, they cleaned up our beaches. They even had an underwater squad here for the first time. Last year, this effort, 800,000 volunteers picked up over 18 million pounds of trash. And if you go to the Oceans Institute's webpage and report on this, they found some interesting things, including like toilets, miles of fishing line, enough plastic bottles to fill a Olympic pool, We have done a lot around here on the conservation side as well. And we preach about it a lot. But you know, I would encourage you, if you've never done it, and we often don't take advantage of what's right around us, take a ride up into the mountains. Take a look at what your tax dollars are protecting. It is truly amazing. Take a drive, a slow drive, along the Pacific Coast Highway, and just stop somewhere. Stop somewhere where nobody else has stopped. Find a remote spot where you're just you and the ocean. And if you do not hear the voice of God in the waves, or if you do not see the hand of God in the mountain sunset, you're not listening or looking very hard. Better yet, next time you see extreme weather or really feel the heat that seems to never or end, or simply rejoice in a tiny sprinkle because that's all we get, listen to what the voice of God is calling us to do. Cry out in anguish and anger and fear, and then do something. Hear God's voice in the thunder and answer. Answers God's call. Tell God we do trust in you and we do trust what you're saying, and we shall act accordingly, and we may even have the power to calm a storm. Amen.